my goal for the show is going for two dudes in black t-shirts just talking about stuff. That's really the whole point.
We hit that one.
That's it, man. Yeah, we didn't plan this, by the way, the black t-shirt thing. That's just sort of my uniform.
It's a designer's outfit, it's in my closet.
I just got a whole a closet full of black t-shirts. All right, let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. This week's episode is brought to you by Mento Design Academy, where it's not just about learning UX design, it's about discovering your unique path in it. And their approach is different. It's personal. It's tailored to you. They don't just teach, they inspire students to use their passions as a driving force in their learning. And that is something that I've experienced firsthand as a mentor. I've been fortunate enough to guide students who are exploring concepts that they're truly passionate about. It's not just about following a curriculum, it's about shaping that curriculum around what excites each student. And this approach emphasizes not just knowledge, but a deep love for the discipline. And seeing my mentees grow, apply their passions, and craft portfolios that are genuinely them, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career, to be honest. So if you're looking for a UX course that's as unique as you are, check out Mento Design Academy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Mento. And just for my listeners, use the promo code BeyondUX200 to get $200 off the course. So join Mento and let your passions lead your learning journey. This week's audiobook recommendation is You Learn by Living 11 Keys for a More Fulfilling Life by Eleanor Roosevelt. And in You Learn by Living, Eleanor Roosevelt, yes, that Eleanor Roosevelt, presents a compelling guide to personal development and societal contribution, drawing from her rich life experiences. She outlines 11 key principles, including embracing continuous learning, overcoming fear, wise time management, achieving maturity, and engaging in civic responsibilities. And Roosevelt advocates for the importance of individuality, effective leadership, and community service, offering timeless wisdom on how to live a purposeful and fulfilled life. And it's amazing how this book holds up over 100 years after it was written. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to start your free trial and download You Learn by Living completely free and help support the show in the process. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So I've got a guest today I am really excited about, author of a new book that just came out, In Fulfillment. Yep. I'm really excited to talk to Justin today. This is something I think designers, we care about so much, this idea of finding a fulfilling job. Obviously we don't care about just a paycheck. Otherwise we'd be accountants or lawyers or something else like that. Justin Dauer is an internationally renowned design leader, author, and speaker from Chicago, from Chi-Town. You'll find him often engaging with the AIGA's speaking events, interviewed in Forbes magazine and Medium's Forge publication, penning articles for Acquient, CEO World Magazine, and A List Apart, which I love, by the way. I actually saw Jeffrey Zeldman gave you a shout out for your book. That's pretty, I love Jeff. I've followed him for a long time. He speaks internationally on culture and design, including keynotes at the UXPA International Conference, Midwest UX, and St. Louis Design Week. Justin's also the writer of the celebrated book, Creative Culture, founder of design leadership consultancy Anomaly by Design, and former VP of Design at CVS Health. Justin, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
Great, Jeremy. Great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm really excited. Yeah, this is such a great book. And this is something that I think struck a chord with me. And I think a lot of other designers out there, when you think about design, it's such something that a lot of people, they get into and they want to be a designer. They want to solve problems. And one of the things that I want to start this conversation off. You actually closed your book with the question, why do we want to be designers? Why are we designers? But before we hop into that, Justin, tell me a little bit about you. Tell everybody out there who might not know who you are, a little bit about you, your background, and ultimately about how you ended up writing this book specifically.
Yeah, certainly. And thanks for asking. It's kind of, when we go around the room, we do intros in meetings. I tend to have the most boring origin story. So I've never really deviated from design. I've never really left the nest, so to speak, in Chicago. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. But I graduated from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago many years ago with a degree in visual communications, graphic design. And at that time, if you told your mom or your dad you're going to be a web designer, they would kind of scratch their head and say, "What?" So this is like, late 90s. So that fusion of design with the digital landscape, I guess I'll say, is what really started to fascinate me when I was in art school. I was studying, formal traditional design and layout and typography, but the problems to be solved amongst applying design to the web, that really got me, those challenges. So I taught myself how to code and while I was in art school, and the rest is history to better understand, the underlying decisions of my design choices. From then to now, and this is the Lightspeed version, in-house, out-of-house, tech design agency, studio, healthcare specific towards the end, what have you. All those different angles and perspectives have shaped where I'm at today. And I wrote a book called Creative Culture, which I appreciate you mentioning in the intro, at a more macro level about the environment we exist within and kind of leveraging the same practices and how we treat one another and how we create. And then I got a little more micro with this current book, In Fulfillment, to talk about how fulfillment is not only essential to us in our work, but to those who engage with it.
Yeah, I love it, man. That's awesome. Well, the book is fantastic. We're definitely going to dive a little bit into the themes in the book today. And like I said, one of the things that you close the book out with a really interesting question that I feel like a lot of designers, I don't know, have really asked themselves and thought about too deeply. But that idea of, why are you a designer? I get a lot of, I do a lot of mentoring and stuff, and I get people that are looking to break into UX especially. And this is very true for junior designers, career shifters, people who haven't even found their first UX job yet. Really hard time right now to get work in UX design. And this is often the first question I ask: why do you want this job versus any other job that could be infinitely easier to get right now? And I'm curious, why are you a designer? It's such a profound question. I'm just curious, from your perspective, that question has a lot of meaning. And why do you feel like, people don't necessarily ask themselves that question maybe as often as they should? I'm wondering if you've ever thought about that.
Well, I think people can have their foot on the accelerator in any career. I could ask, why are you a dentist? Or why are you a lawyer? Or, why are you a PM? And I think, there might be some blinders on in some capacity where you first say, oh, this might be interesting. And then you go to school and you get your degree and then you get your foot in the door. But to slow down and pause and have that lens of introspection, I think, is something we might potentially skip past, particularly, over the last 3+ years with what's been going on in the world and the pandemic. And it's really hard just to stay afloat amongst a myriad of considerations, let alone pause and have such a thought. So, I've posed this question to people in person. I've posed it on LinkedIn, and I've gotten some great responses. One person said, I got into design because I, was making forum signatures for a video game I was playing, and that kind of pushed me on the way, and which is a great answer. But I think with any answer you respond with or might come back with, going deeper is where we get to it, air quotes, get to it, if you will. Okay, so if it's making forum signatures, what about that? Scratch the itch. Was it the challenge of visual problem solving? Was it the feedback you received upon doing your work? So evolving in your craft is kind of what drove you. So I think even if you give an answer, the first thing that comes to mind, and some people have a response and some people don't, when you give that answer, slowing down and kind of digging into what still are the drivers there, that's when you get to the meat of why are you a designer or why are you an X? And I think some really interesting things and possibilities start to bubble up.
It's interesting too. One of the answers that I get often when I ask that question is I like to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing about that is, we assume that somehow the UX design team is the only one on the team who's actually solving problems. And, the first question I ask back is, well, what about the other teams who are solving problems? I mean, why not become a product manager? Why not become a software engineer? And, that's when I think it's that idea of digging deeper and actually figuring that out, because, the whole book is talking about having a fulfilling career. And it's funny because when you think about solving problems, it's ironic that often the UX design team is left out of the conversation to actually go and help solve a lot of problems, and we become pixel pushers. And in that sense, you're not really solving any problems at all. So then that really begs the question, why UX design? And then ultimately, though, that leads to, I think, a lot of other things that your book talks about too, which is finding the right place, finding the right team, finding the right leader, finding the right culture, and then in that kind of asking those really critical questions. And it's funny though, you mentioned people give you that answer. It's often one of those things where you have to have a conversation with somebody else to really pull that out of you. And I think a lot of people are missing that in some senses, like they might go on ADP list or something and find some generic mentor or something who just gives them a bunch of fluffy opinions. I'm curious there, like, how do you do that from a junior designer's, just maybe career shifter perspective? Find those people that are going to pull those answers out of you. Because I feel like that's really hard to answer that question.
It is. Yeah, that's a challenging question. And what I try to do in the book is give people the tools to solve that question themselves if they can't find that person. So for example, being able to slow down, leverage a framework or a platform that is specifically designed and tailored to help you answer those questions and to help you slow down. And I think, successful mentors or coaches are less going to be orating at and more collaborating with somebody to help kind of coax those answers out or extract those. I think it's a dialogue over a monologue in any kind of learner and educator capacity. So, ideally the tools are there to help folks answer that question themselves. I think at the core of it all, and I've said it already many times, I'm going to say it a lot more, is slowing down what I like to call pausing with intent. And that could be a personal reflection tool. That could be a cultural tool at the office. That should be something that leaders at the team and hierarchical level in an organization support and enforce in a healthy way. So I think giving folks the opportunity and the window to slow down and have those moments of reflection are equally important.
And one of the things I want to dive into in a minute is this framework you mentioned in the book, Make Meaningful Work. I want to dig into that in a second. And while you were talking about make meaningful work in the book, you actually brought it up in this concept or this idea that you were describing about sleepwalking, and I think we've all kind of been there. We go and we just, the day to day, maybe we get a job, we do it for a year or two. It becomes so easy that we can do it in our sleep and we just get comfortable and we end up in what you're calling sleepwalking. And the question then becomes, how do you get from sleepwalking to sparkle? That idea, right? And you mentioned a framework called Make Meaningful Work. I want to dig into that in a second. And you just mentioned finding a framework, which, I guess implies there's maybe more than one out there. You mentioned Make Meaningful Work specifically in the book. I want you to talk a little bit about this idea of Make Meaningful Work and how someone can actually use a framework like that to help dig into this idea of, finding what would be ultimately fulfilling for them.
Yeah, and whether it's this framework or platform specifically or not, and I cite that in the book, and I walk through what the process is, and the intent there is whether or not you're leveraging this specifically or just something else in your own, so you could sketch it out. Just give people the tools to slow down and kind of break these practices apart, so they can understand where their values apply and where their fulfillment lies. So, I want to state out front, and I kind of just did, beating around the bush a little bit. Framework or platform can give people shiver up their spines right away as a term, because, sometimes it's people just trying to sell something, or they're pseudo pyramid scheme-ish, or, they're kind of driving you rather than you driving it. So I was very careful about, what I was suggesting in the book. But the intent here is, and I think this is actually a beautiful way of thinking, leveraging our own personal stories to develop our own personal narrative along the way. So leveraging a story that has meaning to you, breaking that story apart, and then kind of dissecting it to understand why, what were the drivers behind why I did what I did, and how does that come back to my fulfillment. So a little story I like to tell, and in a talk I give, called Our Imperatives: Connection to Fulfillment, is when I have a new employee join my team, my butt is out of my chair and I'm greeting them at the door. So it's like a 6-second story. And then I kind of dissect that. I don't have someone, I'm not playing Wordle on my phone. I don't have someone tapping me on my shoulder. That time is reserved. So I'm physically getting out of my chair to go greet this person in person, or if it's online, I've set up a virtual meeting. Those are the tangible actions. The drivers behind that, I've been that person before when I first joined an organization where I kind of stumble in and nobody knew who I was. Or my boss didn't come in until 2 o'clock that day, and they had no idea what my role was. So that huge disconnection from the energy of signing on the dotted line to coming in the door just made me feel very small. So you can extract from that empathy. You can extract from that compassion. You can extract from that respect, because I want this person to know that I'm there to support them. And you can extract all these values from that, and then they're portable. If I'm a designer, I know those things fulfill me. If I want to leave design to become, I don't know, a carpenter, or I want to become a PM, like I still know those portable values fulfill me, agnostic of what my LinkedIn title is. So that's the crux of the framework, and it leverages different tools and cards and such along the way. And it was developed by the founders of UX Hong Kong, Dan Zook and Joe Wong. So they have that level of thinking there. So I think it resonates with designers again. But that's the crux of it, to really help you slow down, understand what drives you, and understand why you do what you do.
You mentioned like an origin story, like you're, like a superhero or something like that. But in the book, you call out creating like a card, almost like what's your card? You're describing you and your superpowers and all these things that you actually, you didn't say superpowers in the book. I'm kind of pulling that analogy through, but having this story, creating this story, and it's interesting because when you think about, especially before you even start the work, finding a job, one of the first questions anyone is ever going to ask you in an interview is, tell me about you, right? That's the first thing usually you're gonna be asked to talk about, and having that story, not making up a story, obviously having it be true, but thinking about that and actually planning how to talk about yourself and planning how to describe what you're passionate about. We talk a lot about how do you stand out in an interview. I guarantee you that's a way to stand out, is talk about your passion and align your passion with the company's goals and their, what drives that company. And if you can really think about that beforehand to know which company to go out and apply to, so you're not applying to companies that have this mismatch, you're going to already start to set yourself apart and set yourself up for a successful career with this company. I'm curious your thoughts there. Like, is that something you've been thinking about as well? It's doing the work, but also first finding the work is important, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm someone who I've gotten better at it recently, but I'm someone, I've been in the design profession 25-ish plus years at this point. And I'm someone who's always, when we do go around the room and introduce yourself, I always fumble there or choke a little bit. I don't like talking about myself, long story short, but when I'm in an interview, because I have that narrative in mind, and that story is so near and dear to me, and I've gotten more clarity on it over the years, I've always excelled in interviews because I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know I've done my homework. I know how my approach and values align to that organization. Like, why am I even there? Maybe sometimes it's to get a job, which is perfectly fair. But if I want to align to their the business's ethics and see if there's a true synergy there, so I could do my best work, I like to tell that story. And before you even get in the door, you can kind of suss that out and one super simple exercise is, this sounds very basic. Look at the company's website, not just to see how it's designed, but every organization has gone through the same approach that we would on a project. They've prioritized their IA. The navigation is hierarchically designed based on what's most important to them. Where does About Us fall? Is About Us the team, or is it About Us the board? Is the board diverse and non-homogeneous? Is there a day in the life caliber navigation item there that kind of shows what an employee does during a day and how they're supported? There's all these little tells that we can kind of suss out if we're putting, I think every designer has a researcher in them as well. If we're putting on our designer researcher hat and we kind of look at the website, we can suss out all these tools that we use in our work to get a better picture of what the business is about at that point too.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I often tell people too, is, before you go and find out, before you go and accept the offer, do your due diligence, and figure out if this is even an offer worth accepting, or even worth applying to in the first place. And in the book, I actually want to call this out. You mentioned some red flags. You didn't call them, I don't think you call them red flags necessarily, but red flags in a job description. What do they value? I think I'm trying to think of what it was, but you mentioned, thrives in ambiguity or something,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
all these things that tell you right away, like, this team is totally unorganized. They have no idea what they're doing. And I think you compared it to, like a house listing, like a cozy little whatever. It's like, it just means small. That's what, let's just like call it what it is. It's a tiny little house. It's not cozy. It's tiny. So I'm curious, you want to talk through those a little bit? Cause you had a few examples, and I think those are really interesting ways to really suss out whether or not it's even worth applying to in the first place.
Yeah, that real estate language caliber approach. Yeah, like you said, fixer upper or cozy space.
Great opportunity.
Yeah, precisely. You align that to, the example you gave was fantastic. Comfort and ambiguity, which effectively means it's chaotic, and they want you to come in and kind of get thrown into the chaos. There are a lot of great pieces written about this. I'm certainly not the originator of that school of thought, but if you dissect any job post, again, aligning that researcher, designer eye to it, you can kind of you can catch those tells along the way as well. And on the inverse side of it, are they showing the salary description, or are they giving the salary straight away? Are they articulating how their ethics and values are translated in actions over words? So, on both sides of the coin, you can kind of suss out, again, the business is showing their hand and showing their public face in that job post straight away.
Yeah, so that's definitely something. I mean, we could probably do an entire episode just about
Sure.
Dissecting really bad red flags in a job description. But I think that's really important for us, especially like when we think about, the thing I always think about as well is we've got so much control over the situation than I think we realize, right? We have so much power when it comes to these decisions. It's not like we have to accept a job simply because someone gave us an offer. We can say no. I mean, unless like you mentioned, we really need the money. Our kids, are going to go hungry, and we've got to feed our kids. We're desperate for anything. But if we have the privilege, because let's face it, sometimes people don't have the privilege to say no. If we have the privilege to say no, we should really be thinking about whether or not this is the right company for me. And I think a lot of people think I have to do whatever I can do to impress this company. Like, no, they've got to impress you. And if they don't impress you, why would you want to work there? And we talk about this whole concept of having a fulfilling career. If those things don't align, you're going to end up miserable in a year and be looking for a job anyway. So why put yourself through that? Unless you absolutely need the money, which I think is totally fair.
No, that's a phenomenal point. And as much as this is about, this book is about, in one way, looking out for number one. It's looking out for yourself and your evolution and the quality of your work, but also the bigger picture implications there. I say fulfillment, which you think initially like it's all about me, but it's really going from that me to we mentality. If I'm not fulfilled, then I'm sleepwalking. Comfort is not fulfillment. If I'm comfortable, then I might not be pushing the evolution of my work. I might not be advocating for that little bit of extra research. I might not be, kind of tying business metrics aligned to design value and user value internally. So as much as it is about us, it's also about being mindful of the bigger picture of the domino effect of what our decisions and actions and ultimately the quality or lack thereof of our work might bring to the surface.
I love that. Yeah, that's such an important thing to think about too, because, if you, it's like one of those things I think, I work in the aerospace industry, and obviously the idea of put your mask on before you put someone else's mask on. It's impossible to help your team if you're miserable and you just are sleepwalking and you're, whatever. I can't fight this fight. I don't care. Do whatever you want. You're not helping anyone else around you. So if you don't take care of yourself first, how do you take care of the rest of the important stuff? I think that's really the kind of gist, right? That's sort of what you're...
That's exactly it. Great point. Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about one of the big themes in the book also was, the humility of design. And, this is interesting thing you mentioned, and I love this quote. It was, ego cannot exist in UX design. You cannot put yourself first. We talk about empathy, obviously, as one of the major tenets of UX design. That rules out explicitly almost ego, right? I want to talk a little bit about that idea of humanity and humility in UX design, if you will, and tell me what that means to you.
There's a great quote from a person who inspires me greatly. Her name is Zhang Quan. She is a Buddhist monk, and she has her own Chef's Table episode on Netflix. You should check it out. And her quote is, "Creativity and ego cannot exist together." And I think that is such a beautiful, clarifying quote. And I give an entire chapter in this book, which was largely culled from a talk I give called Humility, the Designer's Most Essential Traits. And the title in the chapter in the book is a variant on that. And, this is a very storytelling book. It's not a Gantt chart book. It's not, I do cite a platform, Make Meaningful Work, but it's not charts, and it's not, it's about leveraging the power of storytelling, like I said, our own personal narrative, and developing your own along the way. And I give a whole chapter in this book about my own big head, more or less, and the lessons learned from that, and extracting down how I was able to evolve from that and leverage humility. And essentially, if we are not always humble, agnostic of our years of in the profession, from day one through day 5,000, we don't evolve. We cease to evolve. We have blinders on. We think we know it all. And I am personally, irked sometimes when folks who brand themselves as thought leaders on social media, and they make very incendiary comments, and then folks take that as law. They don't feel empowered to push back against that. And then I feel like that holds the craft back. So I get irked in that sense at being dubbed, not that I am, but folks, when they dub themselves a thought leader, and they are not pushing the industry forward, they are tearing other designers down, or ego kind of clouds the the lens by which they're giving feedback. So I am a huge believer in humility as a driver for us as not just human beings, but also obviously specifically with designers. And in my early 20s, I had some quick success and notoriety with my design, and boy, it went to my head big time. And I did cease evolving, and I did cease the receipt of feedback. And it affected my design. It affected my relationships, personal and professional. And thankfully, my inner circle at the time called me out on it quickly, which enabled me to ultimately pivot and evolve after being able to absorb and process that. So yes, humility is absolutely key as a designer, as a leader, as both to us, to the support of others, and ultimately, I'll keep saying this, the quality of our work.
For sure. Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I've come across these designers that just assume they have all the answers, that are upset when people don't agree with them. It's like, I'm the designer. How could you disagree with me? And I think this is, clear. A lot of them, if they have worked in the real world, they probably didn't get a lot of colleagues that enjoyed having meetings with them, if I had to guess. Those weren't the meetings that their colleagues look forward to having with them. But, I just talked with Tom Griever, author of Articulating Design Decisions, a couple weeks back. And one of the things that he was talking about was just this idea of the rigid designer versus the flexible designer, and how often the flexible designers are the ones who actually get stuff done. And when we think about actually having a fulfilling career, I would assume most designers don't get the fulfillment out of the design. It's or at least UX designers, it's the fulfillment out of the outcome, right? The users being able to do a thing they weren't able to do before. And if you are so rigid that you refuse to work with your team and never actually get anything done, nothing was shipped to a user, they never saw the benefit of the things you designed, how is that fulfilling? Unless you just really love making charts and pushing pixels around, maybe that's something you enjoy doing. But I think that's just like a really great tie-in to that conversation I had with Tom, that, how do you have a fulfilling career when you're so inflexible that you think you're right, that you just can't work with your team to get anything done? Anyway, it seems like a kind of a paradox, if you will. Those designers who think I'm so good, yet can't actually work with their team to get anything done.
Yeah, great point. And Tom's a fellow Illinoisian, so I appreciate I know Tommy's a good guy. Great book. Great points there. And that's at the designer level, certainly. And I would guarantee that a good majority of folks listening to this podcast have dealt with leaders, scratch that, have dealt with managers, because they're not necessarily synonymous, who have had ego cloud the room, or they've defined themselves by their parking spot or their LinkedIn title. And again, like you said, that intro quote, ego absolutely chokes the room, and there's no room for creativity when ego kind of dominates that space. So it ultimately, is tantamount to psychological abuse, dare I say, at the end of the day, because you are not encouraged to speak up. Your work becomes staid and does not evolve. The team is walking on eggshells you feel that weird feeling in the pit of your stomach on Sunday going into work on a Monday. The domino effects from ego are just really harmful, particularly in the field of design.
Absolutely. And this again, it goes back to something, I've heard a few people talk about. I think it's worth noting is, UX designers, we always have empathy for users, or we claim to at the very least. But how often do we find that designers have empathy for their team and the people that they work with, and what is this person, why does this product manager need this thing tomorrow? Why is this software engineer not able to do a thing I'm designing? We don't often take the time. And I think a lot of that ties directly into ego, assuming we have all the answers, we're correct, everyone else should bow down to the UX design, and we have the final say in everything. And, I found that to be like another kind of interesting thing that really ties into everything you're talking about in your book, which is, we have to understand the people in our team. And if we can't work with them to get things done, what are we doing?
Yeah, for sure. That's a big driver behind the second edition of my first book, Creative Culture, in that the same lenses we apply to our work, if it's, I'll say human-centered design, but it could be, people first, or it could just be all living things-centered design, just those broad methodologies, because I know that just using that term can be incendiary for some folks. When we're focused on the impacts of our work and being compassionate towards those we are creating for, we have to turn that lens back inward to our team as well. Leveraging that same common set of values in why do we do research? So we can better understand, so we can align to business outcomes, so we can not broadly apply empathy to certain scenarios we cannot possibly empathize with. All those intricacies and beautiful practices, and bring them back inward to the culture and our team interactions and the way we engage with our team and receive and give feedback. That is the sweet spot. And again, that applies to my second book, leveraging that common set of values between our personal and our professional spheres of existence. It just creates this beautiful environment of harmony where we can, evolve and be our best selves.
So this idea of ego too, I think it also drives this other thing I want to talk to you about, which is getting objective feedback to actually improve our work and ultimately improve our fulfillment. I think, the best work we can do, the best work we can provide our users, the most impactful it is for them. And to me, that's how we are generally, I would hope at least, most fulfilled. One of the things I want to dive into is this idea of objective feedback. And you talk a lot about trying to take, the subjectivity out of giving feedback in a team. And I think, again, this goes back to the ego. It's not just, I like it, I don't like it. It's, this is effective, or you use a different word. I was always taught effective, but this is successful. This is not successful, and why. And I want to talk a little bit about objective feedback there, and how this also, again, ties into this bigger idea of ultimately fulfilling work.
Yeah, this has been in my design DNA since being back in art school. And I have to give props to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for this. When we would put our work up on the wall,
yeah,
and we would give feedback, saying I like it or I don't like it, that was effectively banned. Like, you could not say that. You had to say, when you gave feedback, you had to align it back to the brief, or why was the design successful exactly or unsuccessful. So that's something I very passionately believe in. And, despite my journey along the way and the ego I had in my early 20s and otherwise in the evolution, like that bit though of feedback, giving objective feedback has been something that's been a constant. And, some folks don't see anything air quotes wrong with saying I like it or I don't like it. And, sometimes that feedback is fine, or, scratches the itch in a serotonin capacity. But a designer does not evolve. The work does not evolve. It's not pushed or challenged from I like it or I don't like it. That is a completely subjective feedback. Objective is, like you said, tying it back to goals, business goals, project goals, the brief, the usability testing, the iterations we've done thus far. This is successful because it aligns back to the brief. This is successful because it aligns back to the usability testing we've done in the ultimate results. That pushes me. That confirms that the design I've done is successful because it accomplishes the goal I've sought to accomplish. And I say in the book, what Adina Ram's good design, into the 10 commandments of good design. I try to not to be too incendiary, but I challenge that even. Design is not good or bad. Design is successful or unsuccessful, and its efficacy is determined by if it accomplishes those goals or otherwise. There is no such thing as good or bad design in a quality capacity. So I think it's a little bit of a tweak of thinking. And, I the practices I write about and the tactics I write about in my culture centric books, are very people centric and respectful and compassionate. But one of the things I do outlaw is using like or don't like in feedback sessions, because I think that hinders evolution. It brings subjectivity into the room when that is an objective environment at that point. So something I'm very passionate about, and I feel really does ultimately help our work and giving great feedback.
Yeah, and I feel like, in today's UX education landscape, for me, the things I've witnessed, and I can't speak for every boot camp, for every course, for every instructor out there, obviously, but from what I've seen, generally, a lot of the people coming out of, especially the shorter certificate courses or from boot camps, one of the things they lack more than anything is the skills about critiquing. And I'm often recommending Discussing Design. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, Adam Connor and Aaron Irizarry, but it's a really great book. It talks a lot about actually how to do critiques. And I feel like that is something that we're missing in UX education today. I feel like that's something that obviously in BFAs and graphic design and communication type 4-year degrees, they do a lot of that. I'm curious, is that something that you've experienced with people that you've been hiring over the years when it comes to UX, at least? The ability to actually critique? Is that something that you've seen people able to do, or is that something that you feel like you've had to actually help the team grow that muscle through your own experience and through your own education?
Yeah, I've found it's been more the latter, helping folks grow that muscle a bit. And like I said, I'm pretty darn specific about the language I feel is most effective in a scenario like that. But even the general mindset of giving feedback that evolves and making it as objective as humanly possible. For designers, yes, I've noticed that for those I've hired and those I've brought into the team. But I'll go a step further and I'll say anyone that is invited into the room, because critique always isn't designers. It could be the account side of the room. It could be the PM side of the room, and we're helping them as well give effective feedback. And I've had to stop folks pretty senior up on the hierarchical food chain. They have, boxes on the org chart that are higher than everybody else. And I've had to say, I appreciate that, but why? Like, why do you like it? And kind of coaching them and helping them get there as well. So I think it's effective, certainly for designers, but at an organizational level as well. And it's kind of incumbent upon us, add it to our list. It's kind of incumbent upon us as designers to help the organization understand how to give objective feedback tied back to their goals as well. Unless I like it because it's blue, or I don't like it because it's red. I had a red sweatshirt on when I was 5 and somebody beat me up, so I don't like red anymore. So kind of digging down into those things and framing it objectively is an ongoing thing that we have to kind of work with.
Now you mentioned, goals and outcomes and all these other things. And the thing that I struggle with often, and this is something I used to work in advertising. I actually have a background in web development, web design, graphic design, stuff like that. So I'm familiar with this concept of critique and how it works and stuff, and a brief. You mentioned a brief. That's something that agencies often do because they want to make sure they're providing, the right stuff for the customer. The customer can't complain. We did the thing and it meets the needs of the brief and everything else. But internal UX teams, this is often something that never happens. And I'm curious, you worked in a lot of, CVS Health, obviously big internal team, I assume. Tell me about this. I'm curious, how do you, as a design team that might not influence the larger org, to create these goals and outcomes that then can be designed against, right? How do we design and do these critiques in an objective way when we often don't have those metrics or outcomes to establish a baseline objective result?
Yeah, that's a bit of a tectonic shift, and I'm going to answer this with privilege laced within it. So when I was a VP of design within CVS Health, we were the company I was with was called B Swift. We were acquired by CVS Health, and we became part of the CVS Health family. So I led the design organization within the company at the time. And what I did was, because I had a seat at the table, okay, so I was a VP of design at that point, I and my team and my senior PM put together the design intake brief. And what it did was I was able to then assert and influence at the higher organizational level to say, we're not going to take in anything into our group because we were a shared service. We're not going to take in anything via an email. We're not going to take in you walking a PowerPoint over and pointing to it. We're not going to take a word of mouth or a text. Anything that is a project has to come through this creative intake brief. Here's a link to the form. Fill it out. It comes to the respective people within the organization, and then we'll circle back with you on that. And that is a policy shift. It is a procedural shift. And it, like I said earlier, it is a tectonic and cultural shift as well. And I'd say, my answer is laced with privilege because I had a seat at the senior leadership table there, and I was able to say, look, this is how we have to work. We can't be fielding ad hoc requests. We can't take in something that is a water cooler conversation. I want to see what are the goals? What are the outcomes? Where is this coming from? How far down the chain is it? When is it due? All these things to best set us up for success. So that's just the way we started working, and it dramatically made allocation of people towards work, timing, hiring needs, and me being able to get out in front and articulate those. Because I was able to then articulate all the benefits back to the business and align metrics to that. Metrics is what moves the needles in business, not just me saying we have to do this because it feels good or it's right. How does this help the business? How does this help the bottom line? That's what moves the needle in business. And that happens at the team level or at the higher up on the food chain. So because I was able to kind of have this intricate plan of attack about how it helps us, how it helps the business, how it saves money, then I reported to the CTO, and it became policy very quickly that the design team, this is how they have to work. You're going to follow this process. So I'd buy in at the senior level.
Now this ties into one of the other things, one of the last few things I want to talk to you about, which is the idea of culture's not just top down, it's bottom up. It's how you also work with your team. And when we talk about this intake form, right, as an example of policy, that's a very top down thing. But when we talk about bottom up, there's certainly things that we could do with the people that we work with closely to influence how those things are made. And we might not have a stick, to an incentive to like make sure somebody does it. But, an example that I might have is, and again, I want to start this conversation off with, assume positive intent, right? We're assuming people have best intentions and they're not trying to override the UX team in any way or, force some agenda in a malicious way. Let's assume positive intent. You could talk with your product manager and say, hey, listen, we think that if we were able to have these things done sooner, or we had this more formal way of pulling work in, we would be able to provide this extra value. We'd be able to do these things, which we think in turn would help with these outcomes and blah, 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 and having these discussions. And so I think there's opportunity certainly for, using that idea you got, where culture's bottom up. To me, how we start work is part of our culture, right? I mean, that's beyond just like, do we schedule email or do we schedule meetings over lunch or on Friday afternoon? That's the kind of thing I'm curious, like from your perspective, that idea of culture's bottom up, how can, these, maybe junior designers, people who don't really have a lot of authority within the organization, help to influence some of those things from their position of non-authority? I don't know if is that even a word? Non-authority.
Yeah, and you gave a lot of fantastic examples there, Jeremy, which I appreciate. And actions over words, leading by example. And I corrected myself earlier about leader and manager because they're not always synonymous. But a leader can be anybody. A leader can be someone on their first day. It is not aligned to a job title or a level of seniority and hierarchy. So leading by example and actions over words. And you gave a phenomenal example. They're not booking over someone's lunchtime. There's asynchronous work now and people working in different time zones, so you can kind of suss out where people are at. But people, tend to leave that time empty on their calendar because they want to eat or they want to go for a walk, right? And you can here's another tell. You can kind of tell when there are cultural issues within an organization when people have to reserve that time on their calendar, when they have to block it off and say, don't book a meeting. And I've seen
out
that
of office over lunch
a lot.
Day, yeah.
Exactly. So that's a tell as well, but that's another story. So just leading with something small like that and then projecting it outwards. I think sometimes actions over words, absolutely. Being demonstrative of how your values are translated in actions, but then projecting it outwards so others can recognize that. Like telling your immediate supervisor, your manager, you have to be mindful of your sphere of influence, so to speak, in that capacity. Because if you send it to somebody else in another group within your organization, the VP of tech, if you're in design, they'll be like, okay, great, thank you. But if you tell that to your team leader or something like that, then that domino effect upwards, that culture trickling upwards begins to happen. So not picking over meetings is fantastic. Being respectful of asynchronous work and being proactive in communication, I think, is another huge one. Is absolutely huge. And again, that applies to all levels of relationships, not leaving people guessing. Or in our work, we think about visual cues so people aren't left guessing. Again, that same kind of core set of values and how we create versus how we treat one another, I think is absolutely huge. So little steps can go a long way in that sense. Asking your manager if you can kind of pause with your team before a potentially politically fraught meeting, just to chill the energy out, or help people kind of let them know that you have each other's backs. And by taking this half hour not billing, we're able to get back to work much faster after the fact, and people are not don't need to blow off some steam and go for a walk and lose 2 to 3 hours. So everything at the end of the day can be tied back to what can be measured, what can be tracked, what not only feels good, of course, but what ultimately benefits the business. And I think kind of putting that analytical lens about good for me, but good for the org as well, or good for the business, really goes a long way, agnostic of your level of seniority.
I mean, there's so many things too you could do as a lowly, individual contributor without any authority. One thing I always like to do is, instead of scheduling a meeting, I just ping them on Slack and say, hey, I didn't want to have a 45-minute meeting. If we can chat about this right now, let's talk about this over the thing. And if we need a meeting, we'll have one. I think that's like an example. Like when you start to do that and people are like, oh, wow, yeah, that saved me 45 minutes. I didn't have to have that meeting. And then they start to do it. And then, it becomes an organic kind of thing that just sort of spreads. When you're not wasting people's times and they realize you're doing it because you don't want to waste their time, it gets them to think and trust you as well. And then you end up building these relationships, beyond just, these meetings that you have. So, I mean, there's so many like benefits of again, empathy for your team, right? Like doing these things and building that culture from the bottom up, obviously it helps to have the top down. When you have the top down and it's completely misaligned, you start to think about maybe this isn't the right place for me and maybe I need to move on. But anyway, I just love that idea. Again, we have so much more control, I think, than we often give ourselves credit, and I think that's really one of the big takeaways, I think, from your book, for me at least, was you have so much control over your life and the things that you do, and everything should be intentional. It's this idea of sleepwalking versus, finding the sparkle. And I don't know. I really enjoyed that part, I really enjoyed the book for that reason.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm really glad that resonated. Funnily enough, something that ties into that, Karen Van Houten, who's a very well-known researcher, one of her great sound bites is "Canceled meetings are my love language," and I absolutely love that. Like, there's that serotonin hit. Like, ooh, like that was awesome. Like when somebody cancels a meeting, let alone on a Friday. Oh, yeah. It feels so good. And if like you could just like wrap that up in a message or a quick text or something like that, oh, it feels so good. So yeah, being respectful of time. Great example on your part.
One of the other things I always do too is if like I look at someone's calendar and it's the only open time is a Friday afternoon, I will ping them and I'll say, hey, I have this thing we need to talk about. Maybe this isn't a meeting. The only open time is Friday afternoon. Do you think we need to have a meeting about this? And if they respond, yeah, let's do it. That's fine. I'm open, whatever. Or they say, yeah, I got to go get my kids. Cause I mean, I don't know if you have kids. I have kids. I have 2 kids. And like, I forget to put crap on my calendar all the time. Like doctor's appointments, like, like we get to go to school and like volunteer to serve lunch and stuff. And I like completely forget to put that kind of stuff on my calendar all the time. And then people will schedule meetings and stuff. So anyway, I just love, anyway, I really enjoy that concept of empowering our individual contributors to do more than what they think they might be able to. Cool. All right. So Justin, we've had you for a little while now. I've got some questions I want to ask you before we get out of here. But before we do that, go ahead, give yourself a plug. Tell us where we can find the book. Where can we find you? Any speaking stuff you have coming up that you want to promote, anything like that? Go ahead and give yourself a plug.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeremy. I appreciate it. Anomaly with an I by design.com is my design consultancy, where we work at the team, the organizational level for both design and cultural change. So I'd appreciate you checking that out, of course. The book, which just came out, right around 3 months ago. It's about 3 months on the head. In Fulfillment, The Designer's Journey is in-fulfillment.com. So I appreciate you checking that out as well. And you could, if you're interested in picking up the book, and you don't want to give Jeff Bezos money, you can pick it up at a myriad of outlets on the site. There's a few links there. And all my speaking engagements and things like that and podcast appearances, again, thank you for having me as a guest today, are listed on the Anomaly website. So if you'd like a listen, there's a myriad of different angles there through which we talk about this material. I'd appreciate that support.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I found this book to be a fantastic book. It was a quick read as well. What I loved, actually, I loved it, because it's sort of thick. I got the book up. I got it on my camera. Nobody can see it at home. But I love the layout of the book. Actually, it made it there was a lot of space up at the top, so it just made it easy to read. It wasn't like overwhelming. It was easy on the eyes. You could tell. I assume you laid this out yourself, or did you have a team? Yeah, I was thinking like this was definitely something a designer laid out. But anyway, it's a wonderfully designed book as well.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks. That brings a big smile to my face. Yeah, so the first book I started to write, the creative culture book, I started to write with a book apart. And then we ultimately deviated, and I was able to develop my own brand around it. And boy, that really hit core, like being able to design a brand. And then it had that hummingbird character that was supposed to relate to the reader. And designing the brand, having the illustrations, that really scratched an itch for me. So when I would design this book this time around, the layout to the material had to be like translate completely, like in the DNA. It had to be like an apples to apples match. So this is me just talking about design at this point with a stupid smile on my face. So like taking the time with the design and the layout and making sure I loved it. I have one thing I've said before is that my favorite part of writing a book is designing the layout for the book. So it's I'm glad that translated. It's a design UX book, but it doesn't look like a standard UX book, and I think that might be a good thing.
Yeah, it does. It definitely doesn't look like an O'Reilly kind of standard O'Reilly book or anything like that. So anyway, I appreciate that as a designer. I was reading through it and I was like, man, this is really well designed. It's really easy. I don't feel overwhelmed. Like for me, I get a lot of I try to read often, as often as I can. But then, I have ADD too, so it kind of like I'm always kind of like procrastinating to the last minute and things like that. And when I get a book and it's just like pages and pages of wall of text, it just gets overwhelming. And anyway, I will say about the book not having like a wall of text on every page made it easier to get through. Like for me, from like it was like a mental thing. I don't know. Anyway. Gushing over the design. Anyway, great design. Check out the book. It's a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. All right, so we got a few questions here, Justin, to ask all of our guests to help all of our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
So anyone who's been to a talk of mine or listened to a podcast appearance before is going to know I'm a huge Batman nerd. I think one of my favorite quotes in my house when I go down and get the mail and I come back upstairs, is my wife saying, "Another Batman shirt?" Because I have a billion Batman shirts. I'm surprised I'm not wearing one today. But Batman, The Killing Joke is my favorite non-design book. The visual storytelling, the narrative, again, a lot of themes here. The illustrations by Brian Bolland, absolutely brilliant. Again, this is from the lens of a huge Batman nerd, but that's one of my favorites.
I love it. Yeah, I'm big into graphic novels. My son, he's 7, so he's starting to, he's learning to read and all that stuff. And so we've been getting him into comics and graphic novels. Yep. And some of them are a little dark for 7-year-old, but we're trying to find like some of the graphic novels that are there's actually a lot that's like geared towards kids. It's really cool to get them into comics and stuff. So anyway, we've really been digging the graphic novels, and they're a quick read too, which is also nice too. Because anyway, love that stuff. All right, what is your favorite non-design podcast?
Yeah, great question. One of my favorites by far is the Rewatchables, which these couple guys, I think it's a host and a guest that kind of rotates throughout, but they go through movies that have been released in the past. And, it could be a Marvel, again, you're going to see a lot of comics tinge here. It could be a Marvel movie, or it could be a movie, that I watched through a lens of, the 80s or the 90s, which was seemed funny or cool at the time. And then you watch it now and you're like, oh my God, like how did they say this or show that? And they kind of dissect it, and it's just two people talking, and it's very non-pretentious. It's a little pretentious sometimes, but it's just funny how they kind of talk through it, and they play sound clips. And if the family, I have 2 kids as well. We're driving from point A to point B. It's a fun thing to listen to, and just kind of laugh as they go through this stuff. It's very culturally aware and mindful about talking through movies, and it's a good time.
All right, right on. I've never heard of it. I'm going to check it out. Add it to my list. All right. What is your favorite meal? This could be something you've cooked, something your grandma used to cook, favorite restaurant, whatever. Doesn't matter.
One of my favorite things, and I get teased about this a lot, because if I'm at a restaurant, I'm probably going to order it, is salmon in some capacity. I absolutely love salmon. And I try to stay as healthy or fit as I can, so I like that side of it as well. Salmon, broccoli, and potatoes. Very basic meal, and I'm always very happy when we cook it at home as well. Kids love it, which I appreciate. So I don't have to,
Really?
advocate it
That's
for
awesome,
too
yeah.
hard here. But yeah. Yeah. So salmon, broccoli, potatoes. Very basic.
So question, your kids, will they eat the broccoli part?
They do. Yeah. We do this like little singe on it. So it has like this little crisp top to it inside. Just like giving it that little crunch. They're like, ooh.
Yes.
Ooh, what's this?
Okay. So that's really funny. The only way my kids will eat vegetables is if they've been roasted and they're burnt a little bit.
There we go.
And if it's steamed, they will not eat it. If it's boiled, they won't eat it. It's grilled or roasted or something. And if it's leftovers and I heat it in the microwave and it's no longer crispy, they won't eat it. So they will only eat it fresh.
Yeah, you cannot reheat fries in that way. Yeah, exactly.
Very particular palates on these kids. And I don't know, maybe that's my fault. I've probably done that to them. But anyway, kids, man, my kids are the exact same way. They will eat an entire pan of broccoli if it's freshly out of the oven, but they will not eat it any other way.
That's near identical to over here, so I get it.
That's so funny. I wonder if that's like a kid palate, man. They're so funky. All right, what is your favorite vacation spot?
Favorite vacation spot? I went to for our honeymoon. My wife and I went to Italy, and we went to Venice, Florence, and Rome. And Michelangelo is my favorite, I'll say the artist / creative mind that I most admire and inspires me the most. So when you're in Florence, any place you turn, any place you walk, art, like everything you've seen in a history book is like all around you.
Right there.
We went to Vatican City for a day as well, and we saw the Sistine Chapel's ceiling.
Wow.
So like seeing these things that you see in books just melted my brain. Like every place we went to and I saw, my wife's like, "Are you crying again?" And I'm like, "I just can't process what I'm seeing." Like it's just you cannot. I just could not process it. So I would love to go back. I say vacation spot. I've only been there once. I would love to go back, probably when the kids get a little older and they could not be crazy on a flight that long. But Florence just hit me to the soul in terms of the culture and the food and the people and the art. I would love to go back.
Right on. Yeah, we live about 15, 20 minutes from Florence, Kentucky, which is not at all the same as Florence. It's very, very different.
More time on a trip, though, yeah.
You could drive. Yeah, you could make that trip in a few hours, but you won't see anything from Michelangelo in Florence, Kentucky. Oh. That's not going to happen. All right. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Yeah, I might date myself here, but I'm going to go pencil and paper. I'm going to go Statler pen and a nice thicker stock piece of paper. I think we jump into our digital tools too quickly. And this is again going back to art school. Art school keeps coming up here. Going back to my formative training, even then, my intro to visual communications teacher said, "We don't jump into your digital tools, even if it's it's supposed to be rough at that point. It locks you in. You're in box mode. At that point in the iterative process, lines are meant to be. You're meant to be discovering lines and shape and form. Even if you've gotten the brief, even if you've done your homework and you've done your user engagement or your research in advance." Just, I plead, don't jump straight into your digital tools. Sketch it out. You never know what iteration is going to come up. Or if you sleep on it the next day, you're like, I don't want to go back into there and like modify this document. If it's a pencil and paper, you erase it. You sketch again.
Yeah.
You overlay a piece of paper over it and you trace the base and you work from there. I just think that is a step in the design and creative process that has been foregone. And again, I'll say pause with intent. To me, sketching is that pause with intent stage. So pencil and paper, huge advocate for it. Again, in terms of how my teams have worked along the way, that's something else I strongly suggest is that we keep ideas rough and we always have pencils and paper on hand.
I absolutely love that. So here's an audible question, one extra one. Dot grid, graph, or lines, or blank page? What's your favorite?
Yeah, just a pencil and a blank piece of paper, because I've always felt like the blank piece of paper is the most exciting part of the design process. And I've had people call me insane for this. I feel like that's the most exciting part because the possibilities are just open. The sheer potential possibilities at that point are open. So yeah, I certainly use gridded paper or dot grid paper, but to me, like that blank piece of paper, just hits something in the designer soul that I can't even articulate well.
I love it. It might tear up in a minute if we keep talking about it. I'm a fan of the dot grid only because I cannot draw a straight line to save my life. So
that's fair. Yeah, sure. That's fair.
Because it helps me. It helps me draw a straight line. I don't know what it is, but I just cannot draw a straight line to save my life. All right, Justin, awesome, man. Well, that's all I got for you for today. Thank you so much for coming on. Again, I love this book. It's a fantastic book. I think everybody should read this, especially junior designers, any career shifters even. If you haven't even gotten your first job yet, I think this is a fantastic time to, just like you said, take a step back, pause with intent, think about your career and why you want this job, because right now is a very hard time to actually get a job in UX design, and this will actually help you, I think, to just, even if you decide you want to do it, you get that drive and that passion, it'll help you just burn through all the crap that you're going to have to deal with actually finding a job. So check out In Fulfillment by the one and only Justin Dauer, The Designer's Journey, anywhere books are sold, and pick it up. You'll be happy that you did. Justin, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate the time.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Justin and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on how you might be able to find fulfillment in your career. But I'm curious, any of the stuff that Justin's talked about today, have you just happened upon some of these things in your everyday life? Has it helped you? What do you think? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I would love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. If you want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there are some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. You can get a shout out on the show every week. There's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. Don't forget to head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to download You Learn by Living 11 Keys for a More Fulfilling Life by Eleanor Roosevelt. Sign up for a free 30-day Audible trial. Cancel at any time, and the book is yours to keep forever. And in case you forgot, I've partnered with audible.com, so anytime you sign up for a free trial, you'll help support the show. There's no obligation. You can cancel anytime, and the audiobook is yours to keep forever. So get a free audiobook on me and help support the show. And if you're looking for a UX course that's as unique as you are, do yourself a favor and check out Mento Design Academy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Mento and use the promo code BeyondUX200 for $200 off the course. So join Mento and let your passions lead your learning journey. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX than design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. I can't quite do the turtleneck, so I just do the t-shirt. It's like halfway there.